And we are live. How are you, Andrea? Tell me what's going on.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Actually, you know what? I'm wondering if I shouldn't just yeah, you're good. You can
I'm
I can hear you
good.
fine.
I'm
Yeah, you're
audible.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we live? Are we pre I mean,
We
are we
are we
recording?
are
Are we
we are
recording?
recording. We are
All right.
recording. Yes, we are. Take
See,
it
I knew
away.
we were recording the whole time. That's part of my skit. Welcome to the show. The show doesn't have a name. Right now it's just a show. It could turn into the show, maybe, but for now it's just a show. And I'm joined by an American wasp, which to me, I'm allergic to wasps. If I get stung, I get all puffy, and then my lungs start to close up. So, can you explain to me before we begin? Are you a killer wasp? Are you what kind of wasp are you? What? Just go on.
That's a great question, because the acronym White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which was coined by E. Digby Balthazar back in the 60s, as the ruling class of America in terms of the hierarchy within the culture, right? That's where I come from, but not by lineage. So there are different kinds of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. You got the most prolific, which are the Southern evangelical Bible beaters, right? Those are the WASPs that constitute the foundation of the GOP, and I have an intimate knowledge of them because my mother was a Southern evangelical WASP, pure blood. Her blood goes all the way back to Jamestown, Virginia in
Mm.
1608. So that's kind of my mother's side gives me the Southern evangelical credibility. That's one kind of WASP, but that's not the WASP that typically had power back in the post World War II days when the CIA was founded by way of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale. Those were preeminently Northeastern, East Coast white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. The rule of thumb for establishing the CIA was no Jews, no blacks, no Catholics. And if any, maybe a few Catholics, but that would be it. So those are
Yeah.
the two,
Give him
and
a couple.
I get that credibility not by actually being a Yale Skull and Bone Society WASP, but having a father who was successful, and I was raised up in that same culture. But there are other types of wasps. There are, the Midwestern wasp that doesn't even know that they're a wasp. They just think of themselves as a white American. But my suggestion to Ben Dixon last time I worked with him was that when he and other minorities talk about white people, which I enjoy, by the way, because I always find it pretty insightful, they start with dividing the white people, or segmenting, as they say in market terms, in between the Catholics and the WASPs, and then the WASPs spider web and the Catholics spider web, or Christmas tree, I should say, into other subdivisions. But predominantly, we're talking about people who are just non-Catholic whites, not necessarily even religious, but just anybody who's white, who's not a Catholic, and who, whether they realize it or not, but they usually do, they think this country belongs to them. That the core of the WASP culture is a concept that I describe is a fundamental psychological disease that I describe as inauthentic, narcissistic, social entitlement.
That's a good opener. I was just talking about the bugs. I didn't expect all that politics stuff. I don't really follow politics too much. I'm
Yeah, right.
kind of new with the whole politics thing. But wow, that's a lot of information. Would
Yeah,
I would
sorry.
I
It's
be
just
a
my.
wasp? I'm not a Catholic, but I'm also not
I
religious. Am
mean,
I technically a wasp?
do you think that America belongs to you and your people?
No, just me. My
Okay.
people, they can go fuck themselves. Just me though. I do think America belongs to me. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really come from particularly religious people. Are you a religious individual yourself?
No, not at all. I consider myself spiritually on the journey, but I do not definitely don't go to church, except for maybe Easter and Christmas. Um, and that's just out of respect and love for my mother. That's really it. That's all
Mm,
that is. Yeah, I mean, she was, and she's still with us, but she's sick and she can't talk anymore. And it's just watching her go through that is like, okay, she tried. She didn't,
yeah.
I don't let her off with the excuse. There's that cliche, we did the best we could, or your parents did the best that they could. She definitely could have done better. There's no doubt about that. But she did try. She didn't give up on her family. So
That's some.
I respect that enough to pay homage to her cultural connection, to my family's cultural connection. My her side, one half of her mother's side, were like these were legendary ministers in Maryland back in the day. I did this, obviously, this ancestry.com thing where you go back and you see where your ancestors come from. And yeah, it's pretty interesting to see your family line go back, hundreds of years, and to see the tradition of ministers in that family was kind of like, wow, okay. I mean, I guess there is such thing as a cultural Christian, right? I used to think that that was a cop out. That was people like saying, "Oh, I'm a Christian, but I just don't go to church and I don't read the Bible." But yeah, it's definitely a category of human being, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's it's interesting to me talking to someone who at least your mother's side of the family is so entrenched in the religion, but you
Yes.
seemingly are not entrenched in the religion. You know, like what you know, I'm a huge atheist. Capital
Okay.
A
Yeah.
for atheist. I love atheism. Not so much atheists. You know, they could take them or leave them. You know, like a dime a dozen. But atheism, pretty cool. I think religion's probably a net negative, at least at this moment, you know, with the Christians are going crazy in this country. So I always find it like I wasn't necessarily raised religious. Like I was raised in this like weird like, you know, God's obviously true, but no one ever talks about it. So then, like, you know, I just ask a question like, so what's with this God thing? And then I get smacked in the face. But there, I never really went to church, you know, like there really wasn't the whole pray before you eat kind of weird shit like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But like, I'm curious, like, what made you kind of go like, maybe this whole God thing's not so real after all? What's that one?
So I went to an all guys high school, and in an effort to simultaneously be closer with my mother, but also meet girls, I went to God camp
Mm.
for 2 summers, 1 week the first summer and 2 weeks the second summer. And it was actually really fun. But ultimately, that was in high school. And then when I got to college, I really took ownership over my own intellectualism and decided to be like, well, I've been told a lot of things in my life, and they've just become assumptions in my cognition. So maybe I should revisit a lot of these assumptions and take advantage of these years that I have to develop a informed or otherwise intellectually responsible cognition, frame of worldview, intellectually responsible worldview. And having studied the 60s and particularly American history since 1980, like I just realized that the entire culture of conservatism was wrong. And I also studied the New Testament when I was in college, and I found out very clearly that my mother's interpretation of the New Testament was very wrong. Um, and so it was by way of education that I transcended the ignorance of my upbringing in general. But with respect to religion, I have particularly strong credibility there because I gave it a shot. Um, I gave it a real shot. And the appeal of organized religion is, yes, to feel like you have all the answers to the big questions, but the undercurrent of that connection to that culture, values, and now, as you mentioned, their politics, is the community, is every week getting together with the people. And then as I got older and I was like, wait a second, I shouldn't waste my time being available to everyone and anything that seems like a nice person. I should be a little bit more selective. And so as I gave I mean, it really didn't go back to it though. Like I studied abroad in New Zealand in 2004, and then I never really there were maybe two or three other times since I turned 40, which was a year ago, that I went to church. Um, but ultimately, and studying the history of what's been done in the name of religion, and you know, again, my mother using the strict interpretation of the New Testament to justify her strictness as a mother, like I really resented the fuck out of that. It's like, why can't you adapt to your kids? And so, you know, it's a long-winded answer. The ultimate conclusion, though, to what your question is I think it violates the integrity of having authentic relationships with people who are different from you. And I think that's every American's social aspiration, or should be every American's social aspiration, is to actively pursue and engage in with relationships with people that are different from you.
And you think
Um,
Christianity like limits your ability to be like
it
genuinely.
discourages it. Hmm.
Yeah, like because I know a lot of Christians, and like a big thing with Christians is like it's the othering, the persecution complex. Like I remember like I've been identifying as an atheist since I was a teenager, because that's the best time to become an atheist, is when you're an angry, angsty teenager. And
Sure.
so I've been in a lot of situations when I was really young where it's like, I'll just casually say like something about like I don't believe in God, and everyone just like gasps, everyone stares at you. It's like, like you just took your pants off, it's like, whoa, what is everyone looking at? So I've been in that kind of situation. And it's like, I've had my phase where it's like if someone says they're a Christian, like I do the same thing to them, because that's, it's the spite. I'm trying to like get back at that. But it's like, to me, it's like, if someone's a Christian, I don't necessarily see that as like I'm not compatible with you as a person. We can't ever be friends or anything. I just see that as it's an interesting like to me, I view it like my own personal opinion is it's like putting like a lid on
Mm.
your ability to become like a spiritual,
Yeah.
realized, actualized human. Like
Yeah.
I feel like
There's no
it's
journey.
yeah,
There's no
it's like
journey.
it's for you. So from birth, you just have it all figured out. That
Yeah.
to me, that's just I think it's silly, right? But like I can be friends with silly people, So I do agree that like at least in my experience, when I've interacted with Christians, even as an adult, like during protest movements, like I did a lot of protesting in the South when I lived there in North Carolina. And that place is really heavily religious. So people are always bringing God into the protest. God's going to stop the cops from shooting us. God's going to stop all this bad stuff from happening. I don't need to do anything because God's going to solve the problem. Why get it? Why do any radical action? Why chain myself to the whatever? Because God has a plan or whatever.
God's got
And
it.
I've seen all this, and it just demotivates people.
Yes.
And it's always an excuse. Don't do that radical thing that might work because God doesn't want you to, or whatever. And
Yep.
I've seen that in every capacity that I've engaged with religious people. And I don't see that with every religious person, but it's like if you're in a large group of religious people, it's usually like at least one of them is going to do that whole thing. And then the whole
I will
thing just
say,
devolves into real quick. It just devolves
oh
into
yeah.
discussing the religion instead of the actual thing that we're discussing. But go on.
So I will say that with the Catholics and also the people of color who are Christian, they do have a stronger sense of community than my people. And that's a good thing because I think community encourages empathetic perspectives. Um, the reason, so a lot of people struggle with labeling conservatives stupid, even though, according to John Stuart Mill, not all stupid people are conservative, just most stupid people are conservative. Um, most
But all
it's
conservatives are stupid, of course.
they're intellectually lazy, at least sociopathic at worst.
Oh yeah.
Um, and there's 9 different forms of intelligence according to Howard Gardner. I won't list them all, even though I could. The one that matters to this conversation is existential intelligence. Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? Why is it not okay for me to hurt someone when I want to? Right? All these big life questions, these big archetypal questions, conservatives really struggle with those. They want the answers, they don't want to do the homework. They don't want to read philosophy. They don't want to explore other religions. They don't want to consider what I think to be the most mature perspective, which is I don't know what happens when we die. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. That's why I'm going to learn about this world and also learn about myself and my skills and my talent and my passion and pursue those things. See, I didn't get that as from my family. Like I think that's the basic requirements of after, putting food on the table and the basic needs and stuff. That's I think the developmental process that a lot of parents don't encourage, which is like
They
what are
don't
you
even
good at?
know to encourage it. Like, it's like
Exactly.
they don't even know what it is or that it's a thing that anyone could or should do.
And now you're playing into my overarching suggestion to people who struggle to understand conservatives. What do you do when a child does something or says something wrong? And the parents say, well, he doesn't know any better. She doesn't know any better, right? They made that mistake. They said that inappropriate thing. They, what's it called? They made a mistake. They fucked up. And it's like there's that moment of like, do you come down on the kid? Or you say, no, they don't know any better. That's what conservatives are, intellectually speaking. They are children.
Oh yeah, the American toddlers, as I like to call
They are
them.
they are underdeveloped human beings, and it's time somebody said that. My big, and we don't need to get into politics at this point, but I will say that the frustrating thing on the left and the thing that I seek to do is to talk shit to the bully and to tell the conservatives to shut up, sit down, and listen because they don't know what they're talking about. Them being involved in the problem solving process does not facilitate it, it hinders it. So it's all like what we're talking about really is the personal motivation for me to be online and talking to people like you
Is it
and
resent?
trying
Is it spite?
it. So I talked with Ben Dixon about this. What's the difference between revenge and retribution? Revenge is seeking to hurt those who hurt you to satisfy your own sense of personal justice. It's almost like it feels good for me to hurt the bully, right? That's the revenge. Retribution is a response to wrongness deemed appropriate by society, right? So you could say you deserve to go to prison for the rest of your life if you commit murder in cold blood, right? That's justice. That's retribution. But revenge would be we're not just going to send the guy to life in prison. We're going to beat the shit out of him every day and film it and then send that video to all of the victims, all the families of the victims that he
That does
hurt.
sound
Like
pretty good, though. I'd like to see that video.
I know, and that's the tough part for me is I have to make sure I am actively managing and how should I say, just really kind of focusing on that difference. Because as much as I want to hurt them, that's not going to benefit the country long term. I
Hmm.
think it is appropriate to stop arguing them with them. And again, the American toddlers, if they're acting like a child, treat them like one. Stop arguing with them. Stop trying to make these relationships work. I can only imagine the kind of relational pitfalls that you've had to deal with, that every lefty has had to deal with, who has conservatives in their life, who have lived in conservative
I
areas.
basically at this point have just told them all to kill themselves. No, like, don't ever
Yep.
message me again. Just die, bitch. That's usually how I go about it.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I do not fault you for that perspective whatsoever because I say like yeah, like I mean I've said it live before so I might as well say it again, but if you're MAGA or you're even a conservative at this point, not even a MAGA conservative, even if like you're a neocon and you want to help make America great for the first time really ever, you have three options. You can sit down, shut up, and let the educated, enlightened, and empathetic go to work. You can move to another country, or your favorite choice, you can off yourself, because there is nothing good about you being involved in managing our country. There is nothing good about it. And that's, MAGA is not just a verdict on the alt-right, it's a verdict on all of conservatism. I mean, it's just resistance to change in general is a bad thing. Life is all about change. The only constant of the universe is change. And these conservatives are scared to death of change. That's what makes them conservative. And it's about time we started talking about them like they talked about communists during the Red Scare. I mean, is it right? Like, and I want to talk about the boomers, like
Oh man, the goddamn boomers.
I mean,
Why
the
don't they
baby
just
boom.
go boom already? You know what I mean?
It sure would be nice. They are a burden on our society. And did you see the polls? I just found out the polls today, a couple weeks ago, had in the boomers 65 and over, had Trump 49-49,
They
and
just don't know.
then
Is he good or
and
bad?
then
Hard to tell.
and and then that was last month, and this month's results are 56-41 approve disapprove. That's plus 15. So he's plus 15 with baby boomers.
The boomers are like, oh shit, we got concentration camps in our backyard. Nice. Maybe I can go take some pictures. I love this. Goddamn. I love
Yep.
boomers, man. There's one demographic that, like, and there's a lot of great boomers that are watching right now, I'm imagining. But like, let's be real, your demographic, one of the worst. Let's of all time,
The
possibly. Like,
worst.
if you
No,
were to
the
look
worst.
at, like, I'm talking like all of recorded history, tens of thousands of years,
Yes. No,
they
the
are
worst.
probably the worst. Yeah, I agree.
No,
You're
they
definitive,
are the
but
worst. They are
yeah,
the
okay.
worst
Tell me
because
why.
they are the worst for this simple reason. What they could have done. The society, the world that they could have created. And instead of investing in our future, because the purpose of society is to improve itself generation to generation, if you are a decent human being or a good parent, that's a parental value. That's a parental value where you say, I want to give my kids a better upbringing than the one I had. That's good parenting. And that's what the greatest generation kind of was supposed to instill in their kids, but their kids didn't listen. And then when the 80s came along and Reagan said government is the problem, no lefty came up and said, wait a second, FDR already preemptively disproved this. What are you talking about? And then they did things like deregulate telecom, and they did things like deregulate banking and allow for stock buybacks. And the workers got screwed, but their investment portfolios grew. So they didn't care. Because everyone knows that if you want to retire large in America, you got to invest. Your pension's not going to be enough. Your 401k is not going to be enough. You have to invest if you want to retire in America, and more than just your home. Not everybody can just have a 30-year mortgage, pay it off over 30 years, and then sell it and move down to Florida and live off the investment capital, right? But the boomers, yeah, and the big culprit in this equation, because Reagan is an obvious enemy, the big culprit is the first baby boomer president ever, Bill Clinton. And I say politics is Star Wars, policy is Star Trek, political marketing is Jurassic Park. You got to kill dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs we got to kill are Reagan and Clinton. If I were president, I'd put a nice big plaque up on both of their presidential libraries. As everyone drives in, it says failure, and here's why. You see, it's not good enough. This is the thing. It's in line with Michelle Obama's when they go low, we stay high bullshit,
Hmm.
where you think you have to move on, right? How many politicians have you ever heard say elections are about the future?
Hmm.
And my response to that is, well, absolutely. But in order to have a better future, we have to make peace with the past. We have to come to terms with the past. It's called learning from your mistakes. It's called social evolution. It's not even called social evolution. It's called societal growth. And the boomers decided that they weren't going to grow up and be men and women like their parents, that they were going to be morally inferior to every generation that's come before them, because all of those other generations have the excuse of imperialism. Post World War II was supposed to be when the world kind of got over the hill with imperialism. And
Well, that didn't
then,
end up happening.
and it didn't end up happening long term. And we ended up with the Cold War. So no, I mean, I'm of the opinion that boomers should be told this is not a respect your elders situation anymore with the boomers. It's like
Yeah, fuck these
they they,
elders.
they can come to Christmas, and they can come to Thanksgiving, and they can come to Easter, and they can come to birthday parties and whatever, but I don't ever want to hear your politics again. And if you
I
start
say
to bring
even I would go even further and say you don't get the privilege to see your grandchildren grow up.
right,
You threw that privilege in the trash can, like you don't get to see me for Christmas. You threw that away when you started
right,
voting for these Republicans. Like fuck you. You don't get
if
that.
there's
That's a
still if there's
privilege that
still
I can take
MAGA,
from you. Yeah.
if there's still MAGA, then I think that's absolutely the way to handle it.
There needs to be
Absolutely.
that social consequence. I have a question for you in
Yeah.
regards to the family dynamic and parental
Yes.
systems. One thing that I've said many times is that the nuclear family is the core pillar of fascism, right? Because ultimately, the nuclear family is just fascism distilled down into the smallest form. The dad's the ruler, the kid is the slave, and then the mother is like the slave, the head slave. Like that's basically how the nuclear family plays out.
Yep.
And when we were evolving, we being humans, hominids on this planet, we would often we would get raised by a village, a tribe, or like there wouldn't be like parent would mean something, but it's really it's your elders. That's where the whole nomenclature of respect your elder came from. Is like everyone is your parent, right? All these people are doing what's best for you. But when you put it all in this concentrated, you just have the one ruler, right? It wants to be that authoritarian, right? Everyone
Right.
looks at the great emperors of history, and they're acting that out on their family, on their kids, right? And so like that's kind of like where the boomers, like that was the big thing during the boomer generation, is like the nuclear family. Everyone's got to be as small
Yes.
as possible, as individualized as possible. And to me, that's the biggest thing, is because we're away from that. We see this trend where it's like half of people under 30 or under 40, whatever, are living with their parents. So we're exiting that level of like the nuclear family just by necessity because of poverty, right? But we still have this mindset, oh, you live with your parents, you're a loser. That makes you a loser. You should be, trying to like have like the Homer Simpson or whatever. Like he makes all of that money from one middle class job or whatever, and you can have a whole house, whatever. I don't know if you've seen the Simpsons Index. How much money would you need to have Homer's lifestyle from when the show came out to
No.
now? And it's like it's impossible, But it's like people think that that's the goal they're trying to achieve, and if they don't do that, they're a loser. And then also in the back of their mind, this male loneliness epidemic that people don't shut the fuck up about. That's what they're doing, is they're longing for this history where they get to be their own tyrant, their own authoritarian. The kids listen to whatever they say, or else you get the belt out. You get to rape your wife 5 times a day, and it's no problem because she's not even legally a person. That's the world that they're trying to bring about. That's conservatism at its core, because they all want to be authoritarians. Like that's, at least, I grew up with abusive parents, like they never lived together, but like, it's like you trade one hell, you go over, and then it's a whole different kind of hell. They're just both crazy ass motherfuckers. Right. So like, I had this understanding when I was young of like, I'm literally at the mercy of my parents. Right. And as soon as I was able to like get out of that situation, like I took the first ship I could out of that situation. And then that kind of made me like, I've done a lot of thinking about that in my childhood. And even my mom, like she's not like, a man or whatever, not the patriarchal sense, but like people have been like programmed since birth to like look up to authority, whoever's
Yes.
above you is the best. And then in order to be authority, you need to be like those people. So you
Yes.
need to like, like these, like, my mom's generation, Gen X-ish, right, is like, the people who learned all the wrong lessons, right, from the parents did no reading of their own, and then just had a kid, and 5 years later you don't even remember having a kid, you never planned for it. Well, shit, now I got to send this kid to school. Now the government's going to know if if I'm a failed parent. That was my mom's big horseshit, was like, you can never tell anyone that I beat you, because then they're going to take you away from me, and that's bad apparently. Whatever. But it's like, my thing is that I think people want to be that authoritarian. They're trained and taught since birth that the
Yes.
authoritarian is the one to be respected. And
Yes.
then people don't really plan to have kids. I wasn't like a planned child. I just kind of spawned out of nowhere all of a
Yeah.
sudden,
Wow.
in the middle of
Yeah.
a bender, like, whoa, now there's a kid in my fucking bedroom, like, how did that happen? Right. So it's like, then you just default to the programming. You don't read, you don't learn anything. And what's the programming? Just be an authoritarian. The kid
Yes.
says no, you punch them in the face. Doesn't matter. No one's around to say no. Well, the only one who could say no is the cops. And as long as the cops don't find out, and then it becomes like, it's like the cult, where it's like, you got to keep the secrets. You can't tell anyone about the secrets, what stays in the fan or happens,
Yes.
and that kind of thing. And I think that that's really like dovetailing with the boomers, like having ruined everything. That was the big thing about the boomers, is the nuclear family. At
Yeah.
no point in history has that been a concept so much so as the boomers, when they were children, and then like that kind of ideology that they brought forward. And man, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think you're right on the money. I think your logic is flawless, and that the cultural insight is profound. I say that fascism is the natural devolution of Reaganism into Trumpism. That's was going to happen if conservatism was allowed to stay in power and devolve, because that's what happens with age, right? You become a more extreme version of yourself. I'm seeing it with my parents. I've seen it with my parents for the last 20 years. And the nuclear family absolutely encourages a fascistic worldview, a consolidation of power. At the end of the day, we are not that socially evolved, or at least we're not as socially evolved as we should be by now. We should have gotten over war by now. We should have gotten over imperialism by now. We should have universal health care in America by now. We should have fixed the telecom problem that allows Fox News to tell lies by now. But yes, it definitely plays into the male primitive desire to dominate and to kill, to use the threat of killing as a means of getting power. Because I say that there's houses with yelling and there are houses without yelling. And my advice to all parents, don't be a house with yelling. Because when you're a house with yelling, it's not the yelling that's so horrible, even though it is. It's that the yelling very often escalates into like throwing shit or slamming doors or pounding your hand down on the table to your kids. And what is that? What is that physical gesture mean? I'm hitting this table, and if you don't shut the fuck up and do what I want, then you're next.
And
And
that's
that's
like,
fascism.
a lot of people, they don't even know that that's what they're doing. Like
Exactly.
I would argue, and maybe this is a little mean, and I've gotten a lot of pushback for this, but I would argue that like 80 to 90% of people are kind of just zombies. They don't really question what they're doing. They kind of just are born into the culture that they're born into. They don't really question any of
Yes.
it. They just kind of go along to get along. And if the culture you're born into is evil fundamentally, which I believe American culture is evil at its core, it's rotten. I say this as you got this whole American flag situation going on screen, but hey, I
Oh
think
no, it's
America is
what did you take a
disgusting.
look at the details? It's got the $100
No, I
bills
know.
and
Yeah, I
everything.
know. It's
Oh,
good.
okay,
It's good.
okay.
But like,
Yeah.
I think it's evil. So if you are casually in an evil environment, and you're not doing anything to break out of it, I think you are de facto evil. I think you're an evil person, whether or not you're intentionally evil or not. If you're intentionally evil, throw you away in the garbage. But I think most people, like the 80 to 90% that I said, I think
Yes.
are unintentionally evil. Like they don't really know what they're doing is evil, but their effect is evil. What they are bringing about into the world is hurting people, and they just don't really realize it. Like, do I think that my parents, who I personally believe that they're both terrible motherfuckers, but like, do I believe that they were up all night thinking, how am I going to be an evil overlord? How am I going to destroy my
No.
children's future? No, they're just like, they don't think about any of it. they're just like they just don't give a fuck. You know, they're taking the path of least resistance in a society that rewards sadism, that rewards authoritarianism, that rewards kicking the can down the road on every problem in your life. You know, like one of the things, you know, that my mom taught me, you know, through force was that like a problem is not a problem until it affects someone in an important way, right? So like we didn't have like electricity very often, right? So but then there's a point in school where you know, you kind of have to start doing things like with the internet. Like I grew up in like the early aughts, you know, in school stuff like that. So you know, like when I was in high school, the internet was kind of expected. You know, you have to go look stuff up. So when we didn't have lights for a while, it was no big problem for me. I have to figure something out. But then, like, all of a sudden, it's a huge deal when she can't watch this episode of a TV show. Now it's a huge problem, right? So it's like this kicking the can down the road. Nothing matters until it affects me. That type of
Me.
mentality. Um,
There's a
I
name
think
for
that
that.
yeah, it's the default. I think that people they don't give a fuck. And that how do you like fight against that? Like how do you even treat such a problem where people don't even know it's a problem, they don't question it, they don't realize it, you know?
So let me there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's all good. For starters, I think your percentage might be a little high. I'd and but that
Perhaps.
I admit that that might be me coping. You might be right. There's a lot. You're gonna find that, like, as broy and maybe borderline arrogant as I come across, I actually really enjoy opportunities to admit and find where I'm wrong or don't know something. So I think you could be right about that 80 to 90%. Here's what I know: that 2/3 of the GOP is MAGA, at least. It's probably more like 70 to 75% is now MAGA. Those people are absolutely the type that you're talking about with respect to being both evil they're in the service of evil, so whether or not it's intentional at this point doesn't matter. Like that's part of the left's growth in terms of how it does battle with the right.
We got to amputate
Is
the leg. It's not worth
it
fighting for.
well so that's another thing is you can't cut conservatism out of American culture and society. It's always going to be there. Like in the end zones for the NFL, they have end racism in the end zones as like that's their promotional. That's like their and I'm like, guys, I wish we lived in a world where that was possible. You're never going to get rid of white trash ignorance. That's always going to be a part of American society. What you can do is unite everyone else to isolate, radiate, and mitigate. That's our choice. It's like a cancer that you can't cut out, right? You're saying amputate. Yeah, right. Same idea, just a different version,
The
right?
cancer's on your
It's
liver, you know, it's kind of it's hard to
or it's in your
amputate a
blood, or
liver.
it's in your. I think
Ooh,
it's
yeah.
lymphoma.
All right, okay.
I think it's lymphoma. I think it's in our blood
It's
culturally.
flowing around.
Because what do we celebrate most in this country? Competition. That's what we celebrate. That's our
Oh
god.
yeah.
The America's idol is the culture of competition, and that's
Coming
why
up with these fake contests, you know, like to beat someone so that you can feel special when you would have
right,
gotten way more done if you would have worked together the whole time. And that's the thing, like that's fun for sports, for games.
right,
Should we run
exactly.
our entire society on that? Like, come on now. Like, I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous.
But when you look at most people, I would say that 80 to 90%, I don't know about 90, but 70 to 80%, I'm willing to agree with you, are emotional children. Like America breeds a culture of what you were talking about earlier, where the parent doesn't really care until it immediately affects them, like with the power outage and
Hmm.
her not being able, your mother not being able to watch her show or whatever. That's narcissism. It's not complicated. Narcissism comes in different shapes, sizes, and colors. And just because someone's not a doesn't have narcissistic personality disorder, which 1/6 of Americans do, doesn't mean they do not have narcissistic qualities, especially if they're not educated. If you're not educated, then the social conditioning that takes place within our culture, particularly if you're a man, is be a winner. And it's all about you. And it's all about being the center of attention. Look at Trump. You cannot get even a MAGA trash idiot to disagree with the undeniable truth that all Trump, in terms of his personality, cares about is being the center of attention, just like a child. Because a child is understandably narcissistic. A child can't survive without the help of adults and people that are older than him or her. So,
And yeah, a child's narcissism is one by factor of like they to them this is reality. Like before you go to school, when you're just hanging out and with your parents or whatever, this is the whole world.
right,
Like especially before the age of like TV and stuff. Like how do you even like interact? Like if you're a 3-year old in 1878, like you might interact with some people every once in a while, but for the most part, the whole world is your immediate surrounding. Like this is why I was mentioning how like it's a core fascistic pillar of the nuclear family, because what it does is it destroys people's ability to learn and grow when they're in that age where they should be learning and growing. Like you can get to the age of like 20 by having the emotional and not even just emotional, but just understanding of the world around you, like knowledge of like a fifth grader, like a third grader, like, and we're going backwards on that one. But it's like if you don't know how to even question the world around you or understand the world around you without just being given an answer, like this is what people are doing with stuff like Chat GPT. I don't know how you feel about that, but like a lot of people just ask the AI, ask Grok, ask DeepSeek, just ask them. Like they're outsourcing their ability to do research to this
yes,
machine. And then like
yes,
Elon Musk is trying to just change the machine into being Nazi propaganda 101.
yes,
So you hook people on using it when it's somewhat truthful, maybe, right? And that's a debate. But then once they're hooked on using it, you slowly replace it with this fascist garbage. Elon's, the problem with him is he's going way too fast. He's not doing it slow enough. But like if you would have taken the original Project 2025, right, which was like a slow overtaking of America through the legal system, I think there would have been no resistance, and it would have been perfect. My only saving grace with this breed of fascism, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, is that they're kind of going way too fast and they're going way too out in the open. Right. So I think that I think a lot of people in this current era, like again, like what we're mentioning, is they're not inherently like evil at their core, but they don't question it and they go along to get along in an evil culture. Right. I think what we're in a situation, we need to find the group of people that are the most amenable to like, look, they're just saying it out in the open now. This is what you supported, versus like if they waited 20 years to do the concentration camps in Florida,
mm, mm-hmm.
like you're going way too fast, right? So like speaking of going way too fast, I may have thrown a lot out there, but what do you
No, it's
think?
good. I think you got to hit rock bottom if you're a drug addict. And that's what we're doing right now because we're ODing on baby boomer conservative capitalism. And that is just another way of, in current terms, what you're saying is fascism. And yeah, I hope you're right that we've gone too hard and we're kind of got to go to rehab over these next 20 years because that's how long it's going to take to recover. But
At least.
yeah, um, I think that the AI stuff is again catering to the childish nature of America. I mean, America culturally. I mean, look, you can debate whether or not it's evil. I'm willing to say I don't know. There's a lot of different parts of American culture, and some of them are definitely evil. But as a whole, is all of American culture evil? I don't know. But you can figure out what parts are morally redeemable now just by their predisposition towards certain cultural touch points. The one you're focused on right now is the people who are obsessed with the nuclear family. Um, and I think that's a fair criticism. I think we've lost touch with community. I mean, there's a term in community that we haven't heard a lot from the left, like it's until Zoran. Now we've got someone with Zoran who actually is talking about New Yorkers coming together as the working class community of New York, and that's great, and that's a great thing. But I'm trying to think about what if you have a specific question related to what you said, because
Not
I do.
specifically.
No, I think that here's one thing. So you're seeing a lot of regretful Trump voters, right?
Allegedly.
Online, allegedly, right? Some of them look like actors or sound like actors or have a sarcastic comment at the end that reveals that they were being full of shit. But these people who are wanting to come to the Democratic Party and make it more suitable for them, I'm going to go ahead and tell them to shut the fuck up too, because they've been on the wrong team their entire life, unless, of course, they were, a progressive at some point and then became a conservative, but I doubt any of them are. Um, so now it's time for them to shut up and listen to. Like, it's not good enough. See, this is again the softness of the left, and I think you're pretty tough. The
I try to be.
softness, I think a
From my
lot of people,
bedroom, when I'm safe in my little bedroom, I got my cozy little blanket. Yeah, I'm pretty tough.
I think the progressives are tougher than the neoliberals. I think the neoliberals are soft. And that's a reason why, like, I hate the term identity politics, but I've been experienced it firsthand with the establishment left. And they don't care as much about skills and talent as they do appearances. And
It's all status.
that's where the softness of the left is, where they have this old school big tent mentality of like, let's have a big hug where neocons and socialists are in the same tent. And I'm saying, no, 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 no. If you get these people to come into the tent, it's like a little bit borrowing from evangelical culture, where it's like you're coming in ready to receive. You're coming in ready to learn, because you have been, to your overall point, programmed to think and feel a certain way. That's the part that they're not aware of, is the feelings. They don't know why they feel as strongly as they do. And I am I've talked with Ben Dixon about this. Like, we need multiple messengers, different kinds of messengers to be out there, but all kind of making the same point, that the respect is the problem. Do you respect a child throwing a temper tantrum? Of course not. What do? You send the kid to his room and you say, when you take a couple of deep breaths and you calm down and you're ready to listen, then we can talk. And that's what we need to do with conservative America. That's the isolation, radiation, and mitigation I was talking about earlier. That's how it manifests in what you and I both agree on, which is social punishment. I mean, what else are we going to do? Are we going to sit here and act like you didn't fuck up conservative America? Are we going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, forgive and forget? No, motherfucker. We're never going to forgive. We're never going to forget. And we're never going to respect MAGA ever again, or all of conservatism. Conservatism as a whole must die. In order for America to survive and evolve, baby boomer conservatism as a culture, as a political school of thought, and as a set of values, they've all got to go. They are evil. See, I appreciate your honesty and specificity about the 80 to 90%, but I think that there's a spectrum of evil.
Yep,
right?
I agree.
And there's a lot of people who are maybe complicit of evil, a lot of people who are, quote, innocent bystanders at the moment, who, if they do become politically active and they do get involved, maybe with your local Democratic Socialists of America, that's where my favorite place is to encourage people to go to, then they can be part of the generation that saves America. Because like you kind of alluded to with It Takes a Village to raise a really well-adjusted human being, it's going to take a generation to save this country. It's not going to be one person. It's going to be an entire sociocultural shift that I believe is going to be catalyzed by the millennial generation.
Well, I'm on Team Millennial, so let's
Good.
root for the winners. I have one thing I want to say on this subject is that I find that Americans generally they have a blame problem. right? No one can really, like, in order for us to move on, we need to actually find out who to blame. Like,
Right.
some people say that, like you were saying, like, oh, well, we just doesn't matter who we blame, we'll just move on. I don't think that really works. We've been kicking this can down the road since Lincoln got shot, of like,
Yep.
well, now Andrew Johnson's in town, and all of a sudden he's not going to blame the South as much as Lincoln would have, right? And then we've been kicking this can ever since. And you can go, you can go back to whenever you want, but like, we need to blame what the problem is, and that's conservatism. I remember, not to bring up my fucked up childhood too much, but I remember I used to get bullied in school. And one time I got beat up by a bully in like first or second grade, and the principal brought us both to the principal's office, and we both got equal punishment. And that's like a solid, like, that's a core memory for me of like, I
Wow.
got,
Injustice.
detention because I got beat up, and the principal didn't want to take a side, because you can't take sides. Apparently, that's teaching a bad lesson. So the lesson was that you're both in trouble. And
What
like,
part
to
of the
me,
country
like,
was this in?
New Jersey.
Okay.
So pretty fun up
Wow,
there,
that's
but it was like a
surprising. That's
really, really
surprising.
small public school. I can go more into that at some other point, but we had like 100 kids in my public school. So it was the same class every year. So we never got shuffled. So like the bully, like, it was a big problem the whole time. But anyway, that's a whole separate story. But to me, that's the kind of thing that I see America doing. And like you were saying, the neoliberal, like the super soft Michelle Obama type people, right? Like, they don't want to actually say who the problem is. They just want to say, all right, let's move on. Let
Right.
everyone, all right, we all fucked up. Can we admit we were all immature at some degree? Like, okay, maybe, it was 1% me, 99% them, but it's all, we can agree to disagree. And I think what that boils down to is this notion that everyone has a right to an opinion that's deeply ingrained in American culture. This free speech thing, like, it's just my opinion. And people used to get away with this before the internet. Like, you ever, like, you said you're 40 something. I'm a little younger than you. I'm 29. So it's like, I don't have that many memories of before internet, but like, before the internet was a core part of my life, and I got it late because I was very poor as a kid. If you were to have a disagreement with someone, that's just you. There's really no, like, what are you gonna do? Go to the library? We're too drunk to drive. I was a kid back then. I wasn't drunk, but like, like, you're too drunk to drive. Are we really gonna go to the library? If we go to the library, are they gonna be open? How do we even search this? Right? So like, there's this kind of cancer grew in the American consciousness where you can just kind of think whatever you want, and that's okay. But like,
Mhm.
at this point, and maybe not at this point, maybe actually safely, I would say 5 years ago, I would have said at this point, but now I think the internet is kind of getting destroyed because of this. You could just kind of look up the answer to something and figure it out within 10 seconds for the most part. Some things are more philosophical, but if it's like something like, what's the tax bracket in 1957, you can kind of just look that up. Like, you could, who was in that movie, you can just kind of look that up, right? But like, we as a culture have just decided, nope, I have the right to believe that the sky is blue. I have the right to believe that the sky is green.
Right.
Well, everyone's got a right to an opinion. We got free speech. Like that. I think that that's a lot also at the core here. Is like, people don't want to just definitively say someone else is wrong, but then also the people that are wrong, they don't want to also accept that they're wrong. They want to join whatever movement and have some like washed, they want to get washed, like, I didn't know any better, it's somewhat, and or like, how could I have known? It's not like, we've had the internet for 20 years and you can look things up at any point. How could I have possibly known better? Like, it's, they always want to kick the responsibility to someone else.
Yes.
And I think that that's a big problem going forward, is that we're going to have to like actually blame the group of people, like, actually, you fucked up, and we
Yes.
need to
Yes.
clearly explain
Yes.
why. And then when they kick and scream, you just need to say, I'm sorry, you do not have an opinion on this. This is not in the realm of opinion. Like, that's just not, like, I'm sorry, you
Oh,
can't, when it comes to human rights, that's not an opinion. Like, I don't, this whole only, the white race is this certain kind of people that are like the Jewish people, they're too good, so we have to kill them too. So like, it's just the mediocre people, everyone, who's whatever, I don't understand the whole race science, like, that's just wrong. That's not an opinion. You don't get to have an opinion on this stuff. I'm sorry, but there needs to be some things we as humans just determine, this is in the realm of opinion, this is not. and I think like America especially, we're in la la land, and with the AI internet now, like when all this like you can generate an image that looks like anything and fool half the country with it. You just put like a little filter on there, make it black and white, and all of a sudden people think it's real. I don't know. Maybe we're past that point. But like this whole alternate reality, everyone has their own version of the world, like this Mandela effectification of the world. I don't
Mhm.
know. What do you think about that?
I say in one of my essays that appropriately placed blame is nothing more than problem identification. At the end of the day, you can get lost in all the emotions of political discussion, or you can take what Zoran did and apply it where you just talk about problems and solutions. You don't even need to get into the labels. You don't even need to get into the ideology. You just say food is too expensive. Let's have state run grocery stores so that people can get the basic needs at cost, you know, like for low income families. Let's have free transportation so that, because we can afford it. We're in New York City. We have huge tax revenue. Um, just get down to those problems and solutions. With my mother used to say that all the time. My right to an opinion. She used to say that all the time. And if you talk to well-traveled Europeans or people from other parts of the world, they will say that that quote, my right to an opinion, that obsession with having an opinion is very American. And the one thing that the other essay I want to draw attention to is called The Right Wing Magic Trick: How American Exceptionalism Became American Narcissism. And this also relates to our culture of individualism, how like historians have always called America the emergence of the individual over the collective. And I think that's right. And we've OD'd on that cultural quality. And what you were talking about with people just not doing what I love to do, which is to say, I don't know, or I was wrong. Love it. Love when that happens, because now I'm going to learn. And
It
I don't do
doesn't
a whole lot of
happen much, but I
it.
love it
Doesn't,
too.
I love, but because I don't learn that much anymore. The world, America, our culture is so like, I won't say evil like you, but I'll say under evolved. I'll say like has fallen short of her goal, has underperformed
It's when
for
you
the
get to
last
such
40
a
years.
high, like, if you're top 10 percentile of a certain like skill or whatever, and that skill can just be intellectualism, whatever, learning, you know, like it's harder to get even further because there's less and less like sources, there's a less and less things you can read where you actually gain new information.
Right.
When you're an expert in something and you're like top 1%, how do you actually get better at something, especially when it's like, it's one thing if you're doing like an actual trackable metric, like a sports ball thing or whatever. But if you're like, your goal in life is to figure out the human condition, what the fuck does that even mean? Right. So if you're like in the top 5 percentile of people thinking about the thing, like, and you don't know how to hook up with all those people and like have those conversations, or like, because we live in this scattered society, and especially with this fuckification of the internet where everything's getting sloppier and sloppier, every half video, every time you click on a YouTube video of a new channel or whatever, it could be AI slop, and you don't, and it's just like how do you even find the sources to even further your journey, right? Like how do you even gain, how do you become even more intelligent, how do you even think about that kind of stuff? So like that's the thing about America, is like it tries to keep people at these hard ceilings, right? And that's what I think about the school system, and I'm a huge school hater. I hate that shit. I think the school system is defined to teach us what the limits of our knowledge can be, and to like make it, and to have us have like really
That's
limited
disappointing.
expectations, right? Like that's what I think the school system is designed for. It's not like it's designed to teach you to be smart enough to like put something in the microwave and not burn your house down, but not too smart, to where you actually can start reading what the fuck is in this shit you're eating. Like that's what I like to say.
But
But
you went to public school your whole life, right?
oh yeah, I dropped out of high
Did
school.
you dropped out of high school? You didn't finish college?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. I
So
dropped out of high school. I tried college for like a week or so, and I was like, all right, never again.
all right. So I went the absolute opposite direction, shy of a PhD. But um, I would say going to a private, even elementary school. I only went to one public school in my entire life, and that was for my master's program. But I would say my high school had the right definition of knowledge, which was the dead teach the living, meaning your job as, and because this is not just a normal school, this is people, these are actually, it was all guys, so it was guys who knew that they were smart, but here it's like, we're going to make you smarter. And the purpose of making you smarter is so that you acquire not all of the available knowledge, but maybe all of the available knowledge in a certain field. And then you become an expert in that field. And then, if you're a genius, or even if you're just brilliant, then you will add knowledge to that field. And then that will be your legacy. See, one of the things that they taught us was that your reputation is your most valuable possession. Now, you can debate that, but you can't debate that when you die, and everybody dies, your reputation becomes your legacy. So the whole, I mean, I come from a privileged upbringing, and that's why I was taught to think that when I see the kinds of injustice that you see, when I when I empathize with the pain that you've experienced, I've been taught to think that not only can I do something about it, but I am obligated to do something by it.
That's a
So,
good code of ethics. They should put that shit in the schools or something, you know?
well, it's not a coincidence that it was a private school.
Yep, yep.
And so was my college, which was, I mean, those schools, like, yes, they've become exploitive with tuition increases. Okay. Absolutely. But they still attract the best minds that are in America's youth, right? A lot of people who didn't get to go to Harvard or Princeton or Yale, or even those great small NESCAC schools like Williams and Amherst and Wellesley College and Davidson down south. Like, there's some amazing schools, and you probably learn just as much, maybe even more, from your classmates. The classmates are impressive. Like, it sounds like you got a, I mean, my wife had a similar experience where she didn't get to go to college. Not even like, was that even an option? She didn't even get to go for a week. And it was actually because her parents didn't take the initiative. Her parents didn't line up like, hey, we can get you financial aid, or you can go to a state school and it won't be that expensive. Like a Cal
Yeah, I
Poly
tried
school.
a community college. It was like I think it was like $1,500 for like a course or something. And I just ate the cost. I was like, fuck it. I don't want to do this. I got the book. I read the whole book in like a week or two, and then I was like, whatever.
Well, if you're a voracious reader, then you can become self-educated. I just think a very small percentage of people can become self-educated. I don't,
Yeah,
it
I
seems like
mean
it
that's
seems
one
it
thing
seems
I developed in my childhood was that I loved reading. So, and it's paid dividends, I must say.
I'm very jealous because I have a very short attention span, and it's difficult for me to read stuff. I can do, when I really am passionate about it, then I can suck it up and read it. But I go back into school mode where I'm like, I can't miss anything. I take notes while I read, and I feel like there's going to be a test or an essay coming up I got to do about it. So, yeah, those
Well,
fundamental
that's what I
skills.
was trying to get at too, as
Yeah,
well. With what I was saying about the school system is like teaching people that you have to learn in that specific type of format. That's one thing as I consider myself more like of an autodidact. I didn't really learn much in school. I learned stuff while reading. Maybe I
right.
was in school, because that's my daycare. I'm forced to be there, right? But like I didn't really learn much from my classes. And so for me, like the ability to kind of learn how to learn, if that makes sense, like that's
Yes.
something I take that
Yes.
to all of my hobbies. Like I love playing video games. Like I love speed running video games. So if I play a specific game, I like to be the best at it, or like at least one of the best. Getting number 10 on the leaderboard takes about the same amount of effort as like, you know, I don't know, doing pretty much any like learning any like course, like a couple hours. You could get top 10 in pretty much any kind of game. But if you want to be number one, you're going to have to multiply that by like 100. So it's like, I love learning a lot of stuff to be good enough at, to have fun with. And I apply that to all of my hobbies, like with this space or organization is, I don't know what this is. Like this is something that like, I just like, I'm trying to apply that. Like, how do we even start something? And, like we've talked to a lot of people when we were starting up with this space and are like, oh, you can't do that because how is this going to make money? Oh, you can't. And if it's like, I don't care about money. Like I'm going at this from like I'm trying
Right.
to develop a certain thing. I'm trying to develop a certain skill. This is, and I'm not very good at networking, so I rely on other people to do that part. And
Hmm.
now look, we're doing a network show. But the learning how to learn and then constantly rigorously practicing that, I think, is
Yes,
something most people don't know how to do. Or if they
exactly.
do, they just go back to that school programming of like sitting at a desk with a notebook. And you know what? There is something to that. Like that is a useful component. But that's not the only way you can learn a new skill. I think a lot of the way you learn a new skill or anything or knowledge is just by experimentation, just
Yes,
trying some horse shit.
yes.
Does it work? Like when we were starting up this space, is this going to crash and burn in a week? So far it's been going pretty fine. But
Great.
like some people were concerned that we wouldn't even be able to start it, and I'm just thinking, why wouldn't we be able to start this? This is very easy. All we need to do is just have someone here to sit it on it and have a bunch of people to sign up and actually follow through with what they signed up for. Is that really so
Right.
hard? Turns out it's a little difficult, but we got enough people and it's working out, right? So it's like, how do you even learn is by trying stuff and a lot of fuckery. Like when I'm right now I'm trying to learn a new language, and I've never learned a new language. I never like learned a new language in school or anything. So it's like, how do I learn a new language? I don't fucking know. I'm just trying a bunch of shit, see what works. Like that's kind of and I try to take that to everything I do, and I feel like that's something that like school, it limits you in the way that you even can learn stuff, and then people like they just get put off from learning. Like just the
Yes.
idea of learning is like
They
that's why
hate
like
learning.
they have this like
It makes them
this
feel
is a big
stupid.
thing on YouTube and TikTok where you have to like create this entertaining content. I hate that word. Content is the worst word in the
Yeah,
world.
me
But
too.
like you have to create this fun little thing so that you can teach someone one thing, and that one thing that you're going to teach them is going to be something that doesn't affect them at all. Because you can't teach someone something that they would have to actually integrate into their lives, because then it's, oh no, scary.
I think your point about learning how to learn is the fundamental problem with education in America. I think that we just put information in front of kids and expect them to absorb it and to process it through class. And the teachers can only do so much. They're spread pretty thin as it is. I don't know what the ratio is at the average high school in America, but it's pretty high in
I think
terms
it's
of
like
students to the
25 or
teacher.
30 per
Yeah,
teacher.
yeah, that's pretty high. Um, I think that there are also different learning styles. I struggled with some learning styles when I was young, and it actually made me smarter because I had to work harder to break through those learning curves. People who hate learning, like the way you're talking about, never had that big learning win, right? Like, where's the confidence? Where, like, you have surreal confidence that you can pick up a book, or you can give me, you're the type of person where it's like, if I gave you one subject in 2 or 3 days, probably not even that long, you could come up with you know 5-page paper with original thoughts on that subject
Maybe.
that would that would be built upon what you already studied. That would be evolute. That would facilitate the evolution of thought related to that subject, right?
I
Because at
That's
some
what I
point you
try to
learned
do
how to
with my
learn.
show is I
Right.
try to come up with a new way to think about something or whatever. And that's, yeah, I mean, I try. Am I perfect? No, but it's a
But
lifelong
you
journey.
also you also alluded to my high school's teaching methodology or learning format, which is not complicated. It's just hard. A lot of life is simple but hard. But the learning technique that you describe is try, fail, learn, try again. Not complicated.
It's
It's not
and the
complicated.
faster you can do that cycle, like it's, you need to you need to become an expert at every part in the cycle. Like when you fail and you don't learn anything from
But
that,
that's
like
that's the problem with American culture is that it's a culture like I talked about
it's a
of
culture of failure.
competition. It's a culture. Well, it's a culture that applies shame to failure, right? The reason why those people that you were talking about who just started to hate learning because when they tried to learn, they failed and felt like either a loser or just a failure. And they were like, I don't want to feel like that again. And then you run into like the issue we were just talking about with the thinness of the availability of teaching talent in American schools. Because at that point, that's when a teacher needs to get involved and say, wait a second, dude, don't freak out. Okay. You're not a loser because you got this problem wrong. You know, you're not a loser because of this, that, and the other thing. Right. And I say, like, we have to get specific with our negative terminology, because a loser isn't someone who loses all the time. A loser is someone that doesn't deserve our sympathy because they never learn from their losses. And that's kind of a way, that's a vehicle to avoid what we were talking about earlier with the, like, oh, the conservatives don't know any better. Oh, poor them. We have to, like, dumb it down for them. It's like, no, they got to catch up to us. They got to go into the remedial, they got to go to summer school. And if they're not willing to do that, which is fine because people are busy, shut up. Like, I'm a populist, but I'm also a segmented populist, if you will, where not everybody deserves to be listened to.
That's
It's
the
not
thing. The
like,
core fundamental of democracy is that you don't need just to have everyone to have a right to vote and have a say, but they need to be informed and educated. That is the
right.
core pillar of democracy. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of fucking morons like screaming about their gut based instinct. That's not
Yes.
democracy. You know, that's just some other sort of horse shit. You know, the core
Well, you
pillar
just
of
described
democracy is
American.
education.
You just described American politics since 1980.
Yeah, that's why I don't even think that we haven't lived in a democracy in a long time. I mean, I would say never if you want to take words have meanings
Really?
approach. I mean, I don't
You
know.
don't
I don't
think you don't think FDR's term time was, kind of a peak for us as a society?
well, not maybe a peak on the road to a democracy,
Right.
but
Or,
like,
well, but you say democracy, do you mean, like, define democracy? Like,
everyone has the right to a vote and equal say in
okay, so,
the
like, so
participation
that's
in
pretty
government.
much, so I describe it as an equal opportunity society. That's what our goal is an equal opportunity society. So I think you're right that we were on our way towards that, but democracy just means the fairness of the vote and the popular vote, or the, plurality in Clinton's case, um, of the vote, leads to the people representing the people being supported by a majority of the people. So it just, democracy to me just means free elections. But
Yeah, well, I'm
the
a little bit more
society that,
stringent on it because for me, like when it, not to get too much in the weeds, but we can if you want. But to me, I think of fundamentals of democracy are like you need to know what the hell you're voting on. When you just show up and you don't know anything, you're just looking at the names and you're thinking, well, which one sounds better? That's not. I don't think that that's democracy just because you're allowed to fill in the bubble. Personally,
mm,
I think it starts sooner than that. And I do think that you do need to have everyone get involved. I think when you have like 60% of the electorate or the population just doesn't even vote, is that really a democracy? Well, why aren't they voting? A lot of them are ineligible to vote because of some horseshit rule. That's horseshit. You got a felony or whatever, so you can't vote. And then, what was the felony? Someone planted like, weed in your
yeah,
pocket
so voting
and
rights is a
then they
big
like
issue
put a
for you. Yeah, I
quarter
get
in
it.
the bag or whatever. And then
Yeah,
now
yeah,
it goes over the limit. Now you're a felon. Right. So and then also some people just feel like, well, my vote doesn't matter. Well, then that's a feedback loop, and I empathize a lot with the my vote doesn't matter crowd, but I do believe that you should vote as a matter of not even just civic duty for your country, fuck the country, but it's just a matter of like, you do the most you can within the system and you're constantly trying to push it further, right? So to me, like when you see a populace that like half of the population at least just doesn't even vote, I
yes,
don't even know if you can qualify that as a democracy because they're not participating. They've chosen not to
right.
participate. And I don't know. Like to me, I wouldn't consider that a democracy, but I would consider it a spectrum of, authoritarianism, to democracy, if you want to use that as a spectrum. I
Sure,
think, we're slipping backwards on that spectrum. Maybe you could say FDR was pretty high up, but we still had a lot of segregation problems and
sure.
access to the polling stations and a lot of those places. So that wasn't really a good situation. You could say before Ronald Reagan maybe could be considered a local peak of some kind. I don't know, but I don't know when the peak was exactly. But I know we're going in the wrong direction at the moment.
Um, so I think I would just add a modifier
Okay,
and say that what you're talking about is a functional democracy, and we live in a dysfunctional democracy.
fair.
And then you can go the next step and say your aspiration is a participatory democracy. And there are examples of those in other countries. Like I know in Australia, you're required to vote. And so
Yep.
they have
You
like a
have to
90,
literally pay a fine. You have to
right.
pay the government if you don't want to vote, which I personally think is pretty funny. But
But the participation is the vehicle for societal evolution and by way of political uh, process, by way of the political process. So, yeah, I mean, the democracy that you're, pitching, or you're sorry, the democracy that you're criticizing with, America is very fair, and I think constitute all the reasons why we haven't evolved, why we've devolved as a society, really since 1980. But that's that's just my personal perspective. I'm sure, like you point out, there were a lot of other issues at all times, but I do think that FDR constitutes the ladder that we were on towards that functional democracy that you describe. Or I mean, I think you should just describe it as a participatory democracy, because that's what a lot of intellectuals surrounding the subject of what's the best way to organize a society have said, is that if you get everyone to participate, then the best arguments usually win. And
But that's the thing,
especially,
it's like the difference between hearing and listening, right? Like you can't it's not enough for you to just go in there and pretend to know what you're talking or to
right,
pretend and then fill in
right,
the bubble for whoever sound like you have to genuinely actually know like at least I'm not saying everyone has to be like 100% all they do is live breathe politics, right? But you have to have some I think that does need to be a relatively strict like minimum threshold to participate in a
yeah,
in a world, and we need to instill that like in a young age. You need to
yes,
tell people you
citizenship.
should take pride in being a part of this entire process. But yeah, like when I criticize something, it's with the intent of it being better in the future. But also like I am I'm a bit on the autist side of things. So to me, when I hear the word democracy, I'm thinking, what does that mean? It means everyone has an equal say and is in an equal position to be
Right.
able to make those judgments, right? And you know, I have a lot of criticisms of FDR. He did have concentration camps of his own,
Yes.
and he did
Yes.
definitely save capitalism from itself. And you could argue maybe we'd be better off now if he didn't do that, but that's a whole separate conversation. But I do think that since 1980, we've definitely been on a certain track. I mean, in 2000, we didn't even have a real election. They just totally picked the president in 2000. It was just open and shut case. But like, so we've been in this weird, pseudo, like kind of like where even are we as a continuity of government? Like I would say that that's a clean break. You could argue that Reagan getting into office in 1980 with the hostage crisis too. You could argue that maybe that's a crisis of continuity of government of some kind.
Yeah.
JFK getting assassinated, right? So like what even is the government, what even is like the institution of the country in that kind of sense, if one person can get shot and then now we have a whole different deep state or whatever, you could jump off on any one of those points. But like as a democracy index or whatever, it's hard to say if it's been a continuous
It's not been
thing.
evolution. It hasn't been evolution the whole way. No, it's
Yep.
we've devolved. I mean, there's a good argument since JFK got assassinated. Like we were kind of taking baby steps toward positive change, towards a real society that prioritizes the poor. Um, and when JFK got shot, and then LBJ came in and had some good ideas domestically, but Vietnam destroyed him, and kind of the Democratic Party, and then it was just kind of a stumbling over the country politically, stumbling over itself for a good 15 years there, until Reagan came along. The reason why I invoke FDR is because it's my political marketing side where I'm trying to get
Mm-hmm.
more people involved. And first thing I say is he wasn't perfect, but he is kind of a Reagan type of figure for that the left can use to be like, this is what we used to stand for. And his second Bill of Rights is pretty impeccable. Like, again, back to the getting away from the labels and just getting down to the problems and solution. In FDR's second Bill of Rights, there are rights to healthcare, education, housing, employment, special farmers' rights, and Social Security. I mean, who's going? The only counter argument to all those things is how are we going to pay for it? And that's where the left needs to come up with answers, which we actually do have good answers for. It's just we don't have the leaders explaining those answers very well. So that's actually, I think, the real problem with the left is the messengers, is the people that are supposed to be representing our voice, because they're not doing that. And Zoran is indicative of that problem. But yes, I would love to live in a society that took its education more seriously. Its self-edification is how I would really describe it, is just like learning. And my favorite, if you've ever watched my videos, I use sign postings in the form of Dieter decrees, Dieter dichotomies, and Dieter trichotomies. And one of my Dieter dichotomies, probably my favorite one, is my sixth, which is survivors versus explorers. Everyone is either a survivor or an explorer. Most people are survivors because they have to be. They just they're grinding away on their job. They got a couple of kids to feed. They need to make ends meet. They're just surviving, right? If they did get those basic needs met, they would have explored more. They would have engaged that exploratory instinct in them. And that's why a lot of marginalized minorities are more empathetic, I would argue, than MAGA conservatives or even neocon conservatives and even neoliberals. So that is that's just not happening, right? Like, that's just not happening. And I think that we missed our opportunity. Now we've got a whole generation, we've got multiple generations, large percentages of those generations who are just me first, who are just, if I'm going to make sure that I get mine. That's a survivor's attitude. And I'll call them now competitive explorers. That's who should be out front for progressive America. It's not enough. Like, you're actually pretty competitive. Like, the way you talked about video games is like that, like, winning is important to you. So you would be a good evaluator of political talent, because that's what we need. Give me candidates with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. And
My
because
thing
that,
is I, not to interrupt you too much, but
no,
a
go ahead.
short
Yeah.
is that I'm competitive in certain areas when I feel like it's a necessary thing, right? So to me, sports, that's the ultimate area of competitiveness. You know, I don't like going outside, so my sports are sitting in my chair playing some video games, you know. That's my sports, right? But like when it comes to the area of politics, like I genuinely don't believe that I am a good messenger for the average person, just because like I personally don't like the average person. I personally I don't really participate in what the average person's culture is. I don't really know much about what the average person likes. So I don't consider myself to be that kind of messenger. But like I would like to say that like I do think we need to have better messengers. I consider myself to be someone who's like helping the messengers come up with messages, you know, if that makes
Yes,
any sense.
it
That's
does
what
make
I
sense.
want my role to be. Because I've tried talking to conservatives. I've given it a shot. You know, a lot of the time they find out I'm a trans person and then they just shut their brain off, you know? And so
Yes.
it's like, is it really worth it spending any more time trying to talk to these people, or can I just actually say what the real things are? Can I just talk about the truth and someone else can
Mm.
come up with the slogan, because frankly that's not my job, you know. And so when it comes to FDR, you know, like I definitely understand how that's you know, something you can use as a way to introduce someone to a subject, but you know, he's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, make excuses for the very valid points that you make. Other than to say, like, I have no doubt that the guy really did the best he could. I mean, that he died in office. Like, he won the presidency 4 times. Like, he completely redefined the relationship between the federal government and the citizen. And what you're talking about really with the education aspect is civics, is, people not seeing the value in being a citizen. And, a lot of that has to do with the electoral college mechanically. A lot of people don't show up to vote because they recognize that they already live in a blue state and, whatever, that it doesn't matter because their state's going blue no matter who. And that's really short sighted in a state like California where there are ballot measures that you can vote on and that have a huge impact on people's lives. So, yeah, so I think that I appreciate your honesty with your cynicism because I think it's justified. I think there's totally historical grounds for it. I have just been programmed, and I admit that I have been programmed, and maybe I'm wrong, but I am the type of person that wants to go out and say, no, this is how you talk shit to the bully. You love to the left, but fight to the right. And so I'm going to teach you how to use your right hand, and this is my right hand because it's my conservative hand, to knock the bully on his ass. And then with my left hand, I'm going to put it around the liberals and the moderates. And I'm going to say, let me show you how to do that. Even the progressives, let me show you how to do that. I think if the left has any chance politically, it's going to be because we demonstrate ourselves as superior political athletes. You understanding competition is what I said earlier about, like, I think you and what you can do. A lot of the other channels on this space are going to be tremendous, are already tremendous evaluators of political talent. But it's hard, man. I mean, it's
You only
hard.
say that because you made the cut.
Uh, no, no, that's not true. In fairness, I don't know everybody on this space. I know you and like a handful of others like Ben Dixon and now Devil's Advocate Productions, but who's come on my show a bunch. But yeah, no, I was flattered to be included considering I only have 500 subs,
That's the thing
obviously.
is, not to go on too much of a tangent, but like, you know, the internet as it is, we live in just the internet fucking sucks. Okay. It's awful. It's right wing. Everything is tilted to the right. So like to me, like I don't even like the idea. I don't even know how many subscribers you have, like to me, that doesn't play a part in it at all. And that's another thing. Like when we were trying to get this shit off the ground, it's just like, like a lot of the people you had, we got this from someone. It's like, you have a bunch of people that no one knows about, so who's going to watch? It's like even if we all cobble together one small group, it's not about it's about the quality that you start with. Like you
Right.
want to have good soil, otherwise your shit's going to grow all fucked up. And that's the thing is it's like I don't like the way subscribers work on YouTube. If you have more subscribers, I'm more skeptical. Frankly, that's how I operate. The more subscribers you have, the more like you're kind of catering to people that probably are, so that's the way I kind of maybe have, and maybe you could say it's an overcorrection, but I have like an inversion where it's like the less known you are, the more interested I am because I feel like there's a higher likelihood of finding original thought. Because if you're more popular, you're probably more cookie cutter, you're probably more amenable to the lowest common denominator. And can that be okay? Sure. And do we need people in those positions? Absolutely. But that's not my preferred location anyway.
I
Not to
think
shit on
everybody,
everyone who's popular. I'm not just resentful. I promise. I'm not coping.
no, I think there's an artistic choice that we've both made, which is to just be ourselves. I mean, I say like, I'm not smart enough to guess what the is going to work. I really am not. And that would drive me crazy. So I'm just going to trust my instincts and be really honest. And if I go in with the attitude of this kind of unexpected humility where I'm ready to learn from others and ready to admit when I'm wrong, and definitely like, you know, people have areas of strength, of knowledge. There are probably a lot of things, especially about conservatism, that I know that, a lot of our audience doesn't know. And that's my primary lead in is like, I will explain to you, I will give you rhetorical ammunition to intellectually deconstruct conservatism in casual conversation. That's my first and foremost value proposition. But then secondarily to that is trying to teach the left how to become, and I think you do this too, without even realizing it, how to become better competitors. How to become better competitors. Because, we got all the artists, man. We got all like we got all the people who don't like competition, who aren't into sports. And I want to, I want to be like the coach, and be like, you guys can do, but we can win, because we can have all the best ideas. Doesn't matter if we lose, right? If
Yeah,
you
they're
don't
just gonna burn
fucking,
them. That's the thing with the Nazis is the first thing they did when they took power is they're like, okay, now we have the state apparatus here. Let's not invade everyone real quick. Let's go around the world and destroy all the records of anyone doing things better than us. Right? They went all around the world and destroyed things of left wing thought, literature, and other languages that brought us, to our as lefties historical record of like, fighting for survival in this world against the authoritarians and the freak shows up top. Right. So it's like that's what they want to do is they just want to stop you from knowing, about the stuff that we've done. So we have to constantly just be, it's like your car stuck in quicksand or whatever, the wheels are
right.
turning, but nothing's happening.
That's right. Spinning the wheels. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I'm optimistic. I think, as you get older, you start to think in like 18 months ahead of now, 3 years ahead of now, 5 years ahead of now, right? And as long as we have legitimate elections, I think the pendulum could swing back really hard to the left in 2028 nationally, and
That's
that
a
could
big
have that.
if.
I know, but I got to hold on to something. I mean, call it cope if you want. Maybe it is cope. Only time will tell. I mean,
We'll see.
that's the one God of all gods that even atheists like you can agree with, insofar as a God is defined as something we can't control or even comprehend fully, is time. No one can fight time. Father Time is undefeated, and it's the legacy play that I think a lot of the lefties need to be making, is that, what do you want your legacy to be at the end of the day? Because America's legacy hangs in the balance, and it's up to you to change it. That's an empowering message, but I don't advocate for continued debate over issues that you and I have already resolved, right? Like, the only question about universal healthcare is what kind of system are we going to do, right? That's where we're at. And I don't have time for anyone who hasn't gotten to that place yet, right? Like,
It's a waste. It's a waste of time. Like someone else maybe can take that role, but like I'm sick and tired of talking to people. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And then
right.
you have to explain it 98 times, and then you talk, have another conversation 3 weeks later, and they've somehow magically forgotten everything you said. Oh Jesus.
Yep. All right, man, this has been a great conversation. Do you have anything else you wish to cover? Anything else on your mind? I'm pretty happy.
No, I mean this is to me like this is a good app. This is my second episode of this. Well, at least in the recording order. I don't know how I'm going to release them. I want to try to do a show with everyone on this space, and then maybe we can do another one in the future, once I
Yeah.
get to everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of want to, my goals here are just kind of not to have as much focus on the news of the day, because like,
Right.
well, some people, they need to talk about it, and that's a great thing. But like we need to have more conversations. Like I want to have like a show that we can play this like in a year from now, and it's probably going to be just as good, maybe even better. You never know. Maybe worse. Maybe it's people are going to be mourning when we thought that there would be free and fair elections. Well, you think that? I don't know. I think that ship sailed already. But hey, so like that's kind of what I want to do here. So is just have more intellectual conversations among people here, more forward thinking conversations, because and just more about like our place in history, because it's really easy to
Right.
get laser focused if you're not someone who knows about the grand complexities of human history on this planet. Like most people, they don't really know what happened like before they were born. They just never think about it, and then they don't really think about the future too much, because if you don't know anything about before you were born, uh, how can you even plan for the future? You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like, I think one thing that we need to do is really just start thinking about where we are in the timeline of humanity, and less more on the news and more on the grand vision. I think I pretty much have summed up what I think.
Yeah, I think that's in line with my political marketing, which is know your history. And we've got to come to terms with the last 45 years because, yeah, I mean, that's generous, as you were alluding to. That's generous to say that it's only been the last 45 years. It's really been since Nixon's Southern strategy. You can go back even further than that and deal with all the problems that you said. So, I think one of the more important conclusions and more important pieces of advocacy that we can do in this video is to advocate for people to respond to elections are about the future and we need to move forward as a country with no. We need to make peace with the past. We need to learn from the past. We need to come to terms with the ugly America, right? And because if that ugly American is allowed to thrive, then they're going to be what this country's reputation is abroad and what our legacy will be historically.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we have another shot at this. We as a collective. I'm afraid that we don't, and I'm preparing. Just in my own world, I'm preparing for the reality that I think is going to happen. That we're all fucked. But if we do have another shot at this one, oh man, I really hope we don't fuck it up though, man. Because like we started saying off before, the boomers, they really fucked us over, and I really hope that we don't make the same mistake. I feel like we had our last shot at it in 24, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll have another talk about it in the future, maybe in a couple months, and we'll
Yeah.
see if you're still optimistic. Maybe we can start placing some friendly wagers. I love gambling. That's another one of my guilty pleasures. Huge
Nice.
gambler. Um,
Okay.
Lost a lot of money on the election, but I'm coping with my ways of coping. And yeah, thank you for doing this. And you can feel free to take any clips out of this if you want. I don't know if you want to do that. You don't
No,
have
we're
to.
good. No, we're good.
But I'll
All right.
probably be posting this sometime either this week, next week. I don't know what my schedule is going to be yet, but
All right. Sounds good.
I'm stopping the recording